I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, we conclude our investigation into the mysterious death of Rey Rivera. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, with my fantastic co-host, Alice. Hello, Alice.
Hi, Brett. So, Brett had to think really long and hard. Like, we had to do a lot of thinking about what superlative he was going to use for me because it's just that hard, apparently, to think of a superlative for me.
You know, I'm running out of words. There's only so many superlatives out there, Otherwise, if all words were superlatives, they wouldn't mean anything.
I mean, I guess it's just not as exciting to say, I'm Brett, and this is Alice.
Alice, my pedestrian co-host.
Totally
Alice.
Average, middle of the road.
Totally average.
She's here. You have to listen to her, Alice.
Exactly. I gotta pump you up. We gotta get excited. It's kind of like how they play, music right before a football game or a basketball game. They do the video with all the highlights and the lights are flashing and all that stuff.
Wait, quick question. I'm sure you've thought of this. Do you have walk-up music? What would your walk-up music be?
That's a great question.
Yeah, what's your walk-up music?
Man, you put me on the spot now. I don't know. That's tough.
I did. And you know what? I know you, so don't say something like Bon Iver, okay?
I mean, well, obviously my walk-up music would be our theme song. So.
Whoa, okay. Shut it down. Best answer.
I'm glad I thought of that one. Anyways, do you have walk-up music?
I mean, obviously now it's going to be this song.
Right, exactly. It's funny. I don't know if you've ever seen that Family Guy where Peter gets like 3 wishes, and one of them is that he has like music for everything that's going on in his life or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like the soundtrack of his life. That would be pretty awesome.
That would be pretty great. There's that new show, or maybe it's not that new. What, Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist? Have you heard that or seen it?
I have not seen it.
I've seen the first few. It was like beginning of quarantine. I watched a lot of it, but that's the whole premise. She hears music as her life, and everyone's singing to her, but she's the only one who hears it.
That's awesome.
It's
like
pretty great. NBC's not paying us, but if they wanted to pay us for just plugging Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, please come our way. I
mean, basically, we'll plug anything, guys. Anything.
we have no standards.
No standards. If somebody wants to pay us some money, we will plug it. So today, we are here to conclude our investigation into the Rey Rivera mystery. Thank you guys for sticking with us through 2 episodes and now coming into a new week. And I got to tell you, I think it was worth the wait. I really like this story. I mean, it's a tragic story, obviously, but I feel like Rey Rivera is one of those mysteries where the attention and the true crime community really, I think, is bringing some closure to this case. I mean, I really believe that. I feel like when we get to the end of this episode today, the theories that we throw out there, I think are pretty solid. And I think they really do explain some of the mystery. And a lot of that's because of all the research and hard work that's been done by people who care about this case. I don't think the police did a whole lot with it.
Hey, Brett, and I'll say, I can't say this about all of our episodes, but I think by the end of this episode, how unsatisfied you may have felt at the end of the Rey Rivera Unsolved Mysteries episode, I think you'll feel the opposite. Whether you agree with us or not, I think that this is one of the most solid I feel about our answers to kind of a cold case.
Yeah, and I mean, we're really setting the bar high here.
No pressure. Listen to the end.
And look, I know a lot of you are going to disagree with us when we do get to that, and we want to hear why, and we want to hear your theories, and we want to hear the facts to back it up. I mean, I think one thing about this case I will say is there's not it's not like, say, the Maura Murray case, where people have looked into it for so long that you feel like, while it's still a mystery, at least you have a lot of facts. I think here there's still a lot of opportunity to develop facts, and I think those facts could shape how you view this. And we're going to talk about that a little bit because there is some information that I would really like to know that I think would basically either confirm or undermine our theory. But I think our theory is a solid one. So let's go ahead and dive in and let's talk about the last few things we need to talk about in this case before we get to those theories. And the first thing I want to talk about is the note. Look, we've been kind of dancing around all of this for a while, and we've told you a lot of things, and now we're going to get into our theories. But before we do that, we have to talk about this note. If you've watched the Unsolved Mysteries episode, or if you've followed this case at all, you know the note that I'm talking about. So this note has never been released, at least the full transcript of the note. You've seen images of it on the Unsolved Mysteries episode. It's rather lengthy, you can tell when you see it on television, but it's been shrunken down so that it actually fits on less than half a sheet of paper. And it was folded down again to about a 2x1 inch piece of paper that was then taped to the back of Rey's computer. So very strange, very unusual thing.
Why would you tape, like, the only thing I can think of taping something to the back of a computer is you think someone's going to hunt you down and you want to hide the information so that hopefully someone finds it after your death.
Yes. I mean, it's like something out of a movie, right? I mean, Mission Impossible 15 or whatever. I mean, you can imagine them doing something like this. I mean, that's exactly what it feels like. And when you read it, it's even weirder. Now, like I said, we don't have a copy, but shout out to a Redditor named Zesty Close Run 850 who transcribed the note as best he could and posted it on Reddit. So I'm going to read you his transcription with the understanding that he did the best he could. Some of this may be right, some of it may be wrong, and there are certainly parts of it that are incomplete. But you hear about this note a lot, but unless you've really hunted it down, you haven't heard the note. And I think it's worth hearing the note because I think it might change your perspective.
Oh man, Brett, it is so weird. It gives me chills.
And Alice, feel free to. This is a long note, so feel free to interject.
It's a very long.
Whenever
Can I say something real quick before you start reading this really long note?
Of course.
Some people have speculated it's just a running list, like a grocery list. You know, oh, I forgot, I'm going to add this to the list. But the problem with that theory is when you have a running list, think about your running list, whether it's on your phone in the Notes app or on a piece of paper. It's just that, a running note, right? You're not editing it or anything. Here, it's clearly been compiled and then clearly shrunk down. It's not like he typed it that small, right? And that's just so weird. So it's not a running list. It's like a complete list that's then been modified so it fits into this tiny half page.
It fits into a half page, and the rest of the page has been torn off. And Allison found the paper that had been torn off in the wastebasket. So it is likely that this note, it was at least printed and taped to the back of that computer, probably on the day Rey died. Because as you recall, Allison had been there up to that point, doesn't remember there being anything in the wastebasket. She goes off, she comes back, there's paper in the wastebasket, and they discover this note. So here we go. Brothers and sisters, right now, around the world, volcanoes are erupting. What an awesome sight. Virtue, and then appears to be Latin. Virtue jaunt mores non separable. If that is what's written, and the Redditor's not sure that those are the exact letters, it's not the right Latin, but the translation is, whom virtue unites, death will not separate. This has been talked about a lot, but that is, in part at least, a Masonic phrase. It's often found on the rings that members of the Masonic Lodge wear. That was a well-played game. Congratulations to all who participated. I hope you enjoyed it. But it was time to wake up, so here I am. I'd like to welcome those who accepted our invitations for membership during the game. We/I couldn't have done it without you. I look on this endeavor to find the truth, but for its own sake, in accepting this quest for the truth, I hope to awake myself with the help of others into a man ready and worthy to receive it. Members of the council, please note that I will lend peaceful concentration to the traditional responsibilities in light of these proceedings, and I will sadly/gladly unclear the standard request of this council within the appropriate time. Again, well done to all who participated. I accept or expect, it's unclear exactly which, the council has invited all the players who gave their lives to this pursuit back so they might join us, hence, here, there, unclear exactly what it says there. Then some names. Tom/Don Hitting. This is a question mark. The redditor's not sure if that's the name. Rayburns, Blackholder, another question mark. John TR, but can't read the rest of it, so it's unclear what that name is. Stanley Kubrick. That name is clear. Fare thee well, Rob/Bob Rosenberg. So
That's just completely nonsensical.
Just to take a break here.
It's completely nonsensical. It kind of sounds like dialogue out of something like The Hunger Games.
Yeah.
You know, it's talking about a game and a council, and then it's listing all these people whom we don't know who they are, and I don't think Allison knew who they were. It's not like they were his friends.
You know, people have speculated, is this a suicide note? Actually, I don't think it's a suicide note. And we're going to talk about this more in a second, but they actually sent this note to the FBI behavioral unit, and they didn't think it was a suicide note either. We'll keep reading. Maybe you do think it's a suicide note, but it really starts, at least for me, I mean, it's one of two things, I think. He's a creative guy. Possibly he's jotting down stream of conscious things for his next screenplay, right? And I think that's basically probably what Allison thinks. I don't know for sure. I don't want to speak for her. Or this is a sign that something has gone wrong in Rey's brain for some reason or another.
It also sounds right, kind of like a psychotic break.
Yeah, that's really what it feels like, right? And I'm going to read the rest of it. And like I said, we'll get into our theories. We'll talk about that more. But it's feeling weird up to this point. Before I continue with my instructions for the council and dates/taken the prize for my service, I'd like to allow Porter Stansberry to choose his prize. Now, Porter won't done, it's unclear exactly, then what looks like Wadre Avisi, unclear once again, words by claiming something I'll just take back. Now that the game is finished, I expect the council to recompensate those who have given, and unclear, to this venture. Along with myself, these players should be made 5 years younger by the council. I mean, look, if you're a conspiracy theorist and you think Agora's like hooked up with the Illuminati or the New World Order, you're going crazy because I'm reading this to you. So I don't know. Like I said, if Alice and I end up dead, I just want you to know it was the Illuminati. So, so don't kill us, Illuminati, or it will prove that you exist. Anyways, so once again, along with myself, these players should be made 5 years younger by the council. Then there's a space, Rivera, blank Rivera, we don't know what's in the blank. Allison Jones, I assume that's his wife's maiden name. Elena Rivera, Angel Rivera, and then in parentheses, my dad. Angel Rivera, in parentheses, my brother. Brad Hogg, and there's a space. And then it says skipping the name part for now. So I don't understand what that means, but then Porter Stansberry, and in parentheses it says he didn't do it himself. Brothers and sisters, our land of achievements has seen many ideas become new innovations since my game began. And then there are a list of innovations, so I'll read them to you. Radio frequency identification, digital music players, portable and otherwise. Then something that's blotted out by water damage, the blotted out by water damage symphony, blotted out by water damage systems, blotted out by water damages Tanta, who knows what that means. Then a new page, which once again these pages are all shrunk down, so it's all on one page. Another one, blotted out by water damage to drill in shale. More water damage and something VCD, DVD, HDVD, HDVO, the human genome, genetic engineering, cloning, Sudoku, apparently, the Ford sale, which I wonder if that's the fuel cell because the Redditor is not sure that that's what it says. Overnight express shipping, which is a miracle. I agree with him 100% on that.
Why is everything water damaged out except for overnight express shipping?
I know, it's like totally random. And another thing people think, and I don't think this is right, is that this is all written in code, and if you could figure out the code, you'd understand what he's saying. But Wi-Fi, Internet, Ethernet, MPEG, JPEG, MP3, AFF, Invisalign. Ray used Invisalign for his teeth, so I guess he thought that was a miracle too. The something robot and mod milk, who knows. Then the letter continues. The rights, patents, and proceeds for all of them should have been transferred to me by now. I know that I think probably brother, Porter Stansberry, has created a way for you to do so. For future transactions, you should, unclear, if any of the properties that I will resume control of. And then here are a list of the properties. My primary residence, which includes a beautiful piece of property in northern Argentina, and I'm told, a mansion in Buenos Aires. Well done, Porter.
This is so bizarre. Porter is coming up more times than anyone, his family or Allison.
Yeah. And
he doesn't have a primary residence in Argentina, by the way.
No. And honestly, the more I read this, the more, I mean, to me, you read the letter, I feel like a lot of this becomes clear, but we'll talk about that in a second. In Europe, you can visit me at the flat in Venice or Madrid. Although if I'm in Spain, I'll probably be at the word you can't read. In Asia, you will be able to find me in Thailand. Another job well done, Porter. I'll keep the bad houses in Los Feliz, California, and this one house in San Francisco, although I'll be looking for a new place in Baltimore and perhaps some other cities. I'd like to briefly mention some movies, books, and music I found very inspired and compelling. I'd like to meet any of you who helped contribute to these works. The Matrix 1, 2, and 3, which, I mean,
Sorry.
You can tell something's wrong with him if he went beyond The Matrix 1, right?
I
The
like
Family
that this
Man.
list starts with The Matrix.
I know.
Like, of all the great movies and I mean, this is a creative guy, right? You would think it would be some, like, literary artwork that is revered through time. No, but he starts with The Matrix.
I know. And the thing that struck me when I saw The Matrix is going back to how he died. He jumped, presumably, or was pushed or fell or whatever off the top of a building. And they did that all the time in The Matrix, right? Like, one of the big tests for Neo was, he has to run and jump off the building, and if he flies, he's the one, and if he falls, he's not, right? And everybody falls. Anyway. The Family Man, National Treasure, which is a conspiracy movie. The Da Vinci Code, which is a conspiracy movie. Eyes Wide Shut, which is a conspiracy theory that involves a secret organization of, like, sex perverts. I don't know how else to describe them. Confessions on the Dance Floor. Haven't seen that one. Can't really speak to that. Demon Days. Sounds interesting, but haven't seen it. The Emperor's Tales. Don't even know what that one is. November Rain. A great song by Guns N' Roses. I mean, I assume that's what he's talking about. Horse/Home by November by the Unbelocos. Meet Joe Black.
About death.
I don't know if he's talking about the original or the remake, but let me just say, one of the greatest, funniest, not supposed to be funny moments in all of movies is in the remake of Joe Black, where Brad Pitt gets hit by the truck or the bus or whatever it was.
That is actually really hilarious. But for those that don't know, this movie is about death.
Yeah. Sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen that. Right. That's who Joe Black is. And it is about death. Yes. And I think I'm trying to remember if there's a scene on top of a building. They definitely land a helicopter on top of a building. I can't remember if the lead character considers jumping off the building or not. Minority Report.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, vaguely, I'm seeing, what's his name? Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah,
You know what I'm talking
I
about.
can't remember his name.
Yeah.
Yep.
Vaguely, I'm seeing him on top of a building, but I don't know. Star Wars 1 through 3, which I assume he means the original trilogy and not the prequels, but Lord of the Rings 1 through 3, Fight Club, which ends with a bunch of buildings getting blown up, 7, The Game, which ends with somebody jumping off a building. And, it's interesting. This note mentions the game and playing the game, and then it mentions the movie The Game. And there have definitely been people, you've probably seen this online, who've grabbed onto that and think that this is all him replaying that movie, and that he thinks if he jumps off the building, he'll land like, well, I don't hate to give it away if you haven't seen the game, but if you haven't seen the game, I'm not going to give it away, but there are people who think he's replaying that. If you have seen the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about, so we'll move on. Payback, and then that's it. But then he says, and specifically, let me say, I expect M. Night Shyamalan to continue coming up with great ideas and making great movies. I certainly enjoyed his movies, and it just didn't work. I mean, you know, M. Night didn't really produce great movies after this point. I'm sorry to say. But he did have some good ones, and he lists some of them. The Sixth Sense, great movie, classic. The Village, I thought was very disappointing, but I don't know. The Others, which I don't actually think was by M. Night Shyamalan, though it was a great movie with a nice
No,
twist
I
at the
don't think
end.
it is.
I mean, these are all movies with twists at the end, right?
Yeah.
The Others, I just said The Others. Signs, which has one of the worst twists in the history of movies. And this has Unforgettable, but I think it's probably Unbreakable. And then the rest of it is unreadable. So that's the note.
I mean, so the way you have to kind of visualize it because it's not written as like one big block, right? It's written out in kind of a weird list. And some people on Reddit have looked at it as a picture and said that it spells out HELP for help. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe whether that was on purpose or not, I don't know. But the words themselves are nonsensical.
It's definitely the case that if Agora killed him, or if the CIA killed him, or the KGB killed him, or whoever they are now, if they found this note, they wouldn't, presumably they'd read it and they wouldn't think anything of it, and they just put it back on the back of the computer, right? Like there's nothing obvious in here. So if you think he's doing some sort of code, I guess that's possible. I think that's a stretch, but I don't know that you'll ever be able to make heads or tails of that note unless there's somebody who knows the code, or somebody who can figure it out. Like I said, you can find exactly what I just read to you on Reddit. If you Google Ray's note, it's the first thing that comes up. I would like it. I think it would be good if they went ahead and released the note. I don't think there's any reason not to do that. I mean, we've seen images of it, so you might as well just go ahead and release the whole thing. But that's pretty much all the evidence, and that brings us to some theories, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the factors in this case. And I think we just start off with where the police ended up, and that's suicide. And I think we talked about this before. We've talked about motive. And at the end of the day, motive doesn't matter. So if you're in a trial, you don't have to prove motive. If you've got the evidence that somebody murdered somebody else, it doesn't actually matter for the legal system why they did it. But the why is the thing that grabs people the most. And when you look at this case in particular, people often gravitate towards, why would Rey Rivera, who has everything going for him, do this? And Allison said the same thing. Why would he do this? His life's going great. He's moving back to LA. He's got his polo movies finished, and his business is flourishing, and everything seems to be going well for him. But if you just look at the evidence, just the cold evidence, there is a lot of evidence that he killed himself. And the best evidence for that is just the physics of how he ended up at the bottom of that hole. So the horizontal distance that Rey traveled was about 43 feet. So if you imagine he's at the top of the Belvedere and he jumps off of it, from the end of the Belvedere, he travels 43 feet forward. So imagine he goes straight 43 feet and then he falls straight down, right? That's through his jump, he is carried 43 feet forward. And that's during a fall of about 100 feet plus another 20 after he goes through the roof. So he falls 100 feet, hits the roof, goes through the roof, falls another 20 feet, hits the ground. So in order for that to work, based on those factors, he would have needed to be traveling about 11 miles per hour when he left the roof. That's pretty fast.
That's really fast.
It's maybe not as fast. I'll say this. It's really fast to be pushed off the roof or to be thrown.
Yes. Oh, no. Absolutely.
To give you some reference for how fast that is. So for reference, if you've ever heard of a 40 time in sports, so football players always run the 40, a 4.40 is really good. I mean, that's, your top wide receivers are running at about that level, maybe even a little faster. That's about 26 miles an hour. That's really fast, right? Running at 11 miles per hour would be the equivalent of a 7.240. So that's more like, well, I don't know if I could run a 7.240, but I know I couldn't run a 4.40, a 4.440. In miles per hour, so an 8-minute mile is 7 and something miles per hour, right? So it's pretty fast for a long distance run, but for a sprint, the kind of sprint that you would be doing off the top of a building, it's not particularly
It's humanly feasible.
fast. It's definitely
humanly feasible.
And really, any top athlete would crush that number. Offensive linemen in the NFL, the big fat guys who block, kill that number. None of them are running a 7.240. And Ray is in great shape. He's a former, basically Olympian, as close as you could be to being one without actually being in the Olympics. He swims a lot. He coaches a water polo team. This is a guy who's in good shape. He would have had no trouble reaching that speed. Now, it is harder in flip-flops, which is what he's wearing. And I actually wonder, one of the flip-flops was broken by the time it got to the bottom there on the roof. And I kind of wonder if he was running so fast that he broke that flip-flop. But while it's a little bit harder to do in flip-flops, the speed itself is not a barrier to this theory. There's just no argument that he couldn't have done this.
Can I comment about the flip-flops, though? Okay, so I have a quick personal story. The first time I heard this, that he had to run that fast in flip-flops, I was like, no way. He can't do that, even if he's a near Olympian. But then I thought to a personal experience I had. So I was traveling in the Middle East, and I was on like a tour bus. It wasn't a tour bus because it was actually a group of friends who rented this tour bus, so we were all on it together. And it was the last day that I was there, and I was going to fly home that evening. So, we had toured around, and we were stopping and spending kind of a couple hours on the beach before getting in a taxi and flying home. And of course, because I was in the Middle East, outside of the US, I had my passport. And my passport was in my backpack, which was on like the little the ledge above your seat to carry bags and whatnot. And because it was kind of a long bus ride, and we got there, we were all tired, and I was thinking ahead of, okay, I have to pack my bags, take my bags down to the beach so that I can be ready to leave from the beach. I left my backpack with my passport on the bus. And I got off the bus, and we're all kind of standing around, shooting the breeze, talking about what we're, going to eat, and we're going to meet up on the beach before we all disperse out of the country. And the bus pulls away. And as the bus pulls away and turns the corner, I look behind me and realize I don't have my backpack, which has my passport in it. And I see the bus just disappear around the corner. We were like on a residential street, disappear around the corner, and I was in beach clothes. So I had on a swimsuit, a swim cover-up, and flip-flops. And I looked at the bus, I looked at my friends, and I just yelled, "No!" And I took off running. I left everything. I had other bags that I left behind, and I was in flip-flops. And I am nowhere near an Olympian whatsoever. And I started sprinting down this street. And to give you an idea, this is a residential street, but then it turns onto a major road, and the major road is about 3 stoplights away from the on-ramp onto the highway. And I know I have to obviously catch the bus before it goes onto the highway. And I am running faster than I've ever run in my entire life. And I kick off my flip-flops at one point because I cannot get enough grip on my feet to run fast enough. And I think one of my flip-flops tears out, kind of like Rey's flip-flop did. And I ran the rest of the way barefoot. I felt like my lungs were going to burst. I felt like I was going to throw up because I've never run that fast in my life. But I was like, I have got to get my passport. I'm not going to be stranded by myself in the Middle East. And I think it's over. I think I'm not going to catch the bus. And all of a sudden, the light turns red and the bus has to stop. And it gives me just enough time to run up to the bus, and I start pounding on the door. And the bus driver thinks I must be this crazy person. And he shakes his head like, not open for business, you know? And I was like, no, please let me on. And the light turned greens and he starts going. And I think I must have just looked so desperate. I'm like trying to pry the doors open. And he finally cracks the door open a little. And I just scream, passport! And he lets me on. I grab my backpack, jump off, and he continues on to onto the ramp, onto the highway. So I don't know what exactly this says about Rey, but that my flip-flop tore in almost the same way. But I had to kick my sandals off in order to run fast enough. Now, I ran further than Rey did, obviously. But I didn't run. I don't even think I ran an entire mile. So I'm torn whether he could have run that in flip-flops.
Yeah, I mean, I just think he could.
Maybe you heard the story and think I could.
And, I mean, that makes me think that you could have. In my mind, sort of what I'm imagining happening here is if he killed himself. Now, people have said that he was afraid of heights, which actually makes the running leap make even more sense to me, because I'm not really afraid of heights, but I am in certain weird circumstances that I can't really explain. And I know that sounds really weird, but I literally cannot explain this to you. But there are certain places, if I go, I have like this overwhelming, crippling fear of heights. And it doesn't actually have anything to do with the height. It has to do with the way the building's built, but whatever. That's beside the point. But I could imagine him deciding, I'm going to jump off this building, but I can't just walk up to the ledge and jump. So I imagine him like running as fast as he can, and then at the end sort of pushing himself off. And when he does that, the tongue on the flip-flop breaks, right? And then they're sort of flying off his feet, and he's flying forward, and the rest is history is sort of what I imagine. But what I think we can say for sure, whether he could have done that or not in flip-flops, he didn't just jump off the ledge, and he didn't fall off the ledge.
He couldn't have tipped off.
He wasn't.
Right?
Yeah, he wasn't pushed off the ledge. He wasn't thrown off the ledge. If he went off the ledge, he went off it in a sprint.
So, the other theory is that Rey was forced to jump. If his death is in fact related to money troubles, or to send a message to Agora or Stansbury, someone might have taken Rey up to the roof, held him at gunpoint, or threatened him in some other way, and made him jump. They could have even threatened maybe his wife's life if he didn't jump. So maybe for some reason, him jumping is saving his wife's life. While that may be a compelling theory, the problem is there's just no evidence of that. It's true, no one saw Rey go up to the roof either, but it would certainly be more difficult for two people to go unnoticed than just one person, and particularly if one of those people is not wanting to go, right? If it's an involuntary trip. And also, I think what you just said, Brett, counsels against the forced to jump theory. It's probably hard to force someone to sprint and jump, right? You're probably holding someone at the edge of a building, at the edge, at the very ledge, and saying, you got to jump now. And their toe is like peeking over the edge, rather than saying, okay, run as fast as you can and then jump.
And this is so Hollywood, right? I mean, look, I do think it's interesting about his debts. It's interesting how much money they had taken out on the credit card. It makes you wonder if maybe Rey was borrowing money from other places too. Let's go back to Rey's paranoia when he thinks someone's breaking into the house, and when he thinks someone's approaching Allison on the track. That makes you think maybe he borrowed money from the wrong people, and he's afraid if he can't pay it back, they're going to come after Allison. And you sort of imagine a scenario in which this person catches up with him and basically, forces him to die, though that doesn't really pay your debts. Though maybe Rey commits suicide because they told him, look, you either pay off this debt or we're coming after your wife. And he thought the only thing I can do is kill myself because once I'm dead, there's no point in going after Allison. But This is so Hollywood. If you are a mobster or a CIA agent or whatever, and you're trying to make a point to Stansberry and Agora, taking him to the Belvedere to do it is such a weird thing to do. You know, I mean, you could have
And
made him
also,
jump
he's like a
off.
contractor, right?
Yeah,
It's not even like it would almost make more sense if they were doing it to send a message by taking Porter up there, not like the
right.
contractor. I know he's close friends with Porter, but I don't know that many people outside of the company know that.
Yeah, and I just think you would kill him in a place that wasn't so dangerous. You know, I mean, that's the thing. People always look back on these and say, well, it could have been this, right? But the killer doesn't know. I mean, if it's the CIA or whatever, maybe the killer does know that the cameras don't work, right? Or maybe they've got somebody on the inside who's going to delete the cameras. But what they don't know is I'm not going to run into anybody on the way up. This guy's not going to try and break away from me when he sees somebody in the elevator. I'm going to be able to work him up these stairs. We talked about how hard it is to get to the roof. And yeah, that's a reason to think he didn't do it. But it's also a reason to think whoever did this wouldn't have taken him all the way up to the top of the roof, because that's a really difficult thing to do if you're a killer. And it really exposes you. It really exposes you to all kinds of dangers that's going to either prevent you from doing this or have you discovered if you do. So to me, the forced to jump thing, it just doesn't mesh.
So maybe if he wasn't forced to jump, another theory, and this is pretty popular online, and I found it appealing at first, is that instead of jumping, maybe Ray was dropped onto that roof from a very high point, such as from a helicopter. That does sound very sexy. Now, that sounds straight out of a movie. But there are some problems with Ray being murdered in a conventional sense. And the first is that people live at the Belvedere Hotel. It's not just a hotel, there are actually these private condos. So, Makita Brotman, who wrote the book, and she also lives at the Belvedere, believes that she heard a crash the night that Ray fell through the roof. But she did not hear or see a helicopter hovering outside her bedroom window, something that would have been quite obvious to anyone in the area. Yeah, if you're trying to kill someone, that is not conspicuous at all.
Right.
Bring a helicopter? Might as well bring a jackhammer.
Right.
You know? Hey, everyone, look over here. Look over here. We're about to murder somebody.
And if you've ever lived anywhere where helicopters fly around on occasion, even if they're not flying right next to your building or right over your head, you hear them. They're not quiet contraptions. They're very loud.
They're not quiet, and everyone looks up, right? Because you think it's the military or it's the press. And if that's happening, are they doing some sort of car chase? You kind of want to see what they're looking at. And so it's not just like hearing an airplane because, okay, maybe there's an airport nearby. A helicopter flies much closer to buildings. And in fact, Baltimore is a restricted airspace. So any helicopter that flies in Baltimore would need to be registered to fly. And dropping a body out of a helicopter in the middle of a city is incredibly risky. And on top of that, if you have to register your helicopter, you're just making a record of your murder. And you're just more likely to have someone see you because you're essentially asking people to look at you. And then why the Belvedere? Why drop them right there? Why not, say, go a little bit further and drop him in the bay where if you don't die by the impact of hitting the water, you die by drowning. So if you're trying to kill someone, you kind of have a double whammy there. While at first I really liked the helicopter theory, I just don't think it makes any sense if you're trying to murder somebody.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
So, Brett, what happened then? We've named a bunch of theories like we always do, and we shot them each down. What happened?
Well, I'm actually going to go with a theory that initially I thought was ridiculous, but the more I think about it, the more I think it's right. And that's some sort of mental illness. This is actually Makita Brotman's theory. She wrote An Unexplained Death, as we said. We've talked about that book a lot. It is a great book. Now, it's like 250 pages long, and maybe 125 of those are actually about Rey Rivera. So if you read the reviews, those are the complaints, because she just goes off on these tangents. Now, I love the tangents. I think the tangents are awesome, but I can understand how a lot of people don't like those. But it's a great book. It goes into a lot more detail than the Unsolved Mysteries did, and I would recommend anybody check it out. Her theory is that Ray was suffering from some sort of undiagnosed mental illness, and she believes frankly, that he was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. One weird thing about that, if you know anything about paranoid schizophrenia, you know it typically manifests between 15 and 25. Ray was a good bit older than that. I think he was 32. But weirdly, and I don't know why this is, apparently it manifests later in Hispanics. And moreover, while everyone has this stereotype of what paranoid schizophrenia is like, it really manifests in a lot of different ways. And a lot of those can be subtle and insidious. You can have this for years and years and years, never know you have it, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you sort of have this break.
And Brett, oftentimes when you have a sudden kind of manifestation of this mental illness, it's usually triggered by some sort of major change in your life, even if it seems like a positive change, right? He just moved across the country. He just got married. And stress
Just started
too.
a new business.
He probably had stress. That's right. I mean, whether they are, and stress in terms of the hormone cortisol going through your body, right? Those things can all kind of build up over time within your body until it reaches that breaking point to kind of push you over the edge into the manifestation of this mental illness that you were maybe on the verge of, walking into.
And I think if you look at Ray's behavior in the weeks leading up to his death, you sort of see some of these manifestations. We talked about the note. The note is very strange. The note, in some ways, is almost stereotypical of the kind of thing you would see from someone who was suffering from this. And although we said this, everybody says this, Ray took a lot of notes. He filled up notebooks full of notes. But even Allison said that this note is unlike anything she'd ever seen him write. And as Brotman explains, she's looked into this paranoid schizophrenia a little bit, and she notes, quote, typographically, the note exhibits features that are typical of the writing of schizophrenic patients: single spacing, narrow margins, capital letters, small fonts, and lists. And it is consistent with paranoid schizophrenia for a gradual increase in symptoms to suddenly explode in a psychotic event. So then she talks about the FBI and the fact that the FBI reviewed this letter, and she was able to get at least part of their report through a FOIA request. And here's what they said. In this particular case, the mental illness suffered by the author of the letter may go virtually undetected by family, friends, and coworkers. The writer of the letter likely suffers from persecutory delusional disorder. This type of disorder involves believing oneself is being malevolently treated in some fashion. The writing in this letter is also consistent with someone who suffers from bipolar disorder. This assumption is based on the flight of ideas that could have been written by someone experiencing an untreated manic episode. The writing in this letter is disorganized, and to a lesser extent, it is consistent with someone who suffers from schizophrenia.
Did the FBI solve this mystery?
I mean, I think they did, because here's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how much the FBI knew about some of the things we've talked about. I think they were just sent the letter to look at. But the whole persecutory delusional disorder, in the days up to his death, there had been the incident with the alarm going off where Ray freaks out, and Allison, he's acting in a way that Allison's never seen him act before. Now, maybe that's because he knows somebody's coming after him. That's perfectly possible. We haven't really seen any evidence of that. I think the more likely thing is he's suffering through one of these paranoid delusions. He's having this persecutory complex, the same complex that's led him to start going with Allison everywhere that she goes. And that incident where Allison is running around the track and Ray is rushing out at the man who seems to be walking towards her, who turns out he's probably not. Both of those incidents fit with what the FBI is saying. And it also fits that really his family and friends weren't aware that he was going through this. And in addition to the letter, it's not just the letter. Recall the phone call that Ray had with Porter Stansberry the week before he died, where he said, "I've got it all figured out. I finally figured it out." And Porter's like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." And whatever you think of Porter and what he did afterwards, he played that. The only reason we know it was Porter is because he
wasn't
admitted
trying
it.
to hide it.
Yeah, he wasn't trying to hide that, right? So I think Porter really didn't know what that was all about. And, studies show people who jump off buildings don't often survive, but the people who have survived Around half of them were suffering some sort of psychotic illness when they jump.
Brett, that I was shocked when I saw that number. I did not realize that fact. That's just incredible.
Yeah, I've read, and people out there who know a lot more about this may be able to confirm this, but I've read that jumping is sort of, I hate to put it this way, but the preferred method of suicide for people who have some sort of mental, illness. And it makes sense if you just think about it, right? It makes sense that that would be the case.
Enlighten me. Why?
Well, I mean, think about it, right? Like if you shoot yourself, if you kind of think at least a good percentage of these people who try and kill themselves when they're in the grips of mental illness aren't actually trying to kill themselves, right? So they may think, who knows what Ray was thinking when he was on top of that building. If you follow the game theory that he was reenacting the movie The Game, he wasn't trying to kill himself, right? Maybe he thought he could fly like Neo did in The Matrix, right? He wouldn't have been trying to kill himself. Usually when you shoot yourself, that kind of thing, I mean, there's just not... That's more of a, I have decided to kill myself, I'm going to shoot myself, right?
There's
or I have
more
decided.
premeditation
Exactly.
than that.
That's exactly
Yeah.
right. Sorry. That's way to break it all down for me. There's less premeditation when you're jumping than in some of the other methods that people use to kill themselves. So in addition to this letter, we know that Ray had recently become interested in the Masons. He had spoken to a member of the organization, was reading a book about the group. His letter includes the phrase, "Whom virtue unites, death will not separate," which is a Masonic phrase. Some people have said, well, he was probably working on a movie, but other than pure speculation, we don't have any reason to think that. But what we do know, what everybody knows, is that conspiracy theories have long focused on the Masons as representing the New World Order, the Illuminati, or other sort of dark, all-powerful organizations. And if you go back to that letter, he talks about the council and he talks about the game. So it just kind of fits with that.
And here, both of us have this experience. Both of us are married, and let's just take our podcast, for example. I don't know. I'm pretty sure you do the same. I talk to my husband about our podcast all the time. Like, he knows which episode we're talking about next and what our theories are, what the weird things are that are happening and what research we've uncovered. And so it would be weird for him to be writing a movie and not tell Allison anything about it, especially when it's like your creative writing. You get excited when you're creating something and you want to share it with someone.
Right, and she knew about Midnight Polo. She knew about his horror
Right.
movie that he had done. These were not surprises to her. So yeah, I think it would be very unusual for him not to let her in on that. I think the mental illness angle, it solves basically all the problems here, because the big issue people have, I'll just go back to this, it's motive, right? Like if you just look at the and I think this is why the police thought it was a suicide from the very beginning, because if you just look at the cold facts and you don't care anything about Rey Rivera, it looks like he jumped off the building. The big problem people have is the why. Well, if you bring in this stuff, the mental illness, then I think that starts to shed some light on that.
And I agree with Brett that I think there's probably no question that Ray ran off that building himself. Now, whether it was suicide in the sense that he wanted to end his life, or maybe psychotic break, I don't think we'll know. And I think all signs probably point to suicide, but I just want to point out that, we have been talking about mental illness, and it is possible that, he ran off that building not wanting to kill himself, but rather in the midst of a psychotic break, thinking he could fly or something other. And it's such a vivid picture. It brings to mind this book, a wonderful book called The Center Cannot Hold. And it is written by someone who went to my alma mater, Ellen Sachs. It's about her time at Yale Law School when I don't think she previously knew she had paranoid schizophrenia, but she eventually was diagnosed with it, and she had a massive paranoid schizophrenia episode while at law school. And she recounts, she is now, treated for it, and she writes about it and speaks about it very eloquently. But she talks about this vivid memory where she's in the midst of an episode and she crawls out onto the roof of the law school, and the windows are all like these beautiful old stained glass windows, and you can just pop a lever and be able to push them out, and they're long and skinny, so your whole body can fit through. and she's sitting on the ledge, kind of like a gargoyle. I think she explains that she is a gargoyle, watching over New Haven, and she sees the birds landing on the roof next to her, and she decides that she has to fly with the birds. And if it were not for a professor who happened to see her on the ledge, she basically grabs her and drags her back in. She said that she probably would have seriously injured herself or killed herself by accident that night because she wanted to fly with the birds in this paranoid schizophrenia episode. And obviously, we have no idea what Rey was going through, but if in fact he had paranoid schizophrenia that was undiagnosed, possibly he wasn't trying to kill himself, but maybe he was trying to fly or something along those lines.
And I think that makes perfect sense, particularly you read the letter, you think about some of the things that were going on with him, some of the things he did, some of the things he said, that would fit and it would make sense and it would explain why it is that nobody saw this coming. I mean, that's the great difficulty in this case. The great difficulty in this case is the steadfast belief by his family that he would not commit suicide. And, we can just talk about that's one of the weaknesses with this theory. The family says he wouldn't have done this. And Alice talked about this earlier. It's kind of like the Diane Schuler case. Like, let's put aside mental illness for a second and just say it is suicide, that maybe the $70,000, the project fell through and he knew he was gonna owe this money. It is often the case when people commit suicide that there are signs, and people will often look back and say that. People in the family will often say, yeah, I wish, there were so many signs and I wish we had recognized that because maybe we could have done something. But it is certainly the case that oftentimes family don't know. They don't know the internal struggles for people. And Rey seems like the kind of guy who wouldn't want to burden his family. Just think about those two events where Rey comes running up in the rain in the track, and when Rey comes running out with a bat after the alarm goes off. In both cases, he tells Allison he's fine, it's nothing's wrong, right? Well, that's obviously not true. Something was wrong, and we don't know how deep that goes. So, on the one hand, you don't want to say someone committed suicide if the family's saying that they didn't do it, because there's obviously a stigma attached to that. But I do think it's the case that we don't necessarily know everything Rey was going through, and part of that might have been some sort of mental illness. As Alice said, and as we read earlier, paranoid schizophrenia in particular can be insidious, and it can be something that just strikes out of the blue and family doesn't know about, and it often does sort of initially appear as one of these breaks that people don't expect, and they can be very dangerous. I don't know about the author of the book you were talking about, Alice, but I certainly think if that's what happened to Rey, it was one of those things that had been building and nobody saw it coming, and then there was that break, and unfortunately, when Rey was on top of that roof, there wasn't anybody to pull him back.
Right. And, the author, Ellen Sachs, she talks about that. She said that now that she knows what she has, she first saw signs of it when she was 8. And her whole life, she was trying to hide it. She knew something was wrong with her. She recounts as a kid walking home from school, and the houses and buildings would talk to her. But she knew she couldn't tell anyone because she knew that was wrong. That shouldn't happen. And nobody knew she had paranoid schizophrenia. She made it all the way to Yale Law School. So she entered Yale Law School without having ever been diagnosed with any mental illness and having hidden previous episodes from people, which is just stunning. I mean, she hid it for 2 decades. Rey may have not had it nearly as long, but it is possible to hide the illness. And I think we mentioned this before, but his wife Allison described him as a macho guy who maybe doesn't talk about his feelings, doesn't want to show weakness. And oftentimes when people are having these mental episodes, sometimes they do recognize that it's not right, but they don't want to share it for fear of, what does this mean? Or someone is going to realize something's wrong with me.
Exactly. And you could just imagine that from sort of a guy like Rey, that he wouldn't want to burden his family. And he probably, if he did see signs of something like this coming on, he probably told himself,
I can power through it.
Right, exactly. I can power through it. This is no big deal. I'm just out of sorts. I mean, all the sort of things that you could imagine, that you would tell yourself. You would explain,
You explain it away. I will
Exactly.
say, I have broken bones before and just told myself, no big deal. I'm gonna power through this. And I went days one time
Yeah,
and I really
tell
needed medical help.
tell the audience about that, because that was some crazy stuff right there.
Which one? The time I broke my neck?
Yeah, the time you broke your neck.
Yeah, I broke well, I think that sounds more dramatic than it actually was. But
Whatever. You're still rationalizing it.
so I cracked open my C7, so essentially which is at the base of your neck and right where it kind of like your it connects from your back to your neck, I guess. And I had been rehearsing for a show and had kind of a repeated injury to it. I was dropped on my head multiple times throughout this rehearsal. That was not on purpose, but we were trying to get it right. Kept getting dropped on my head, and I was just sore. But who wouldn't be sore after all day of rehearsals? And so I thought, I'm fine, I'm fine. And I actually even went to go visit a friend in the hospital that night. He was just sick, so I was just dropping by to make sure he was okay. And by the time I got to the hospital to visit him, I couldn't move at all. Like if you slept wrong and you couldn't move your neck, and my whole neck was just stiff, and I could only stare straight ahead. And I remember him asking, like, "Hey, you don't look so good. Since you're at the hospital, do you want to get checked out?" And I was like, "No, I'm fine. Don't worry about it." And I went home, and when I woke up in the morning, I was essentially paralyzed from my shoulders down. I couldn't move or feel anything except for this kind of numb tingling radiating through my body. And I thought I was essentially dead. I mean, because I could move my head, but that was it. And I did not know what to do because what had happened was overnight, because my spine had cracked. I guess your spinal fluid, I'm not exactly sure, it had like started leaking
This
out,
story
and
is
the
so disturbing.
I'm sorry. This is so
This story,
disgusting.
this story will
The
give
whole
you
point is
anxiety.
the whole point is I was really, really hurt and I really needed help, but I didn't accept it. Just all the way to the point where I went home, slept, and it was so bad that I couldn't move when I woke up in the morning. And then I did seek medical treatment when I was able to call for help.
And look, and we don't know a lot about Allison. We've never talked to Allison. Obviously, you see her on the Unsolved Mysteries. If you read Makita Brockman's book, Makita Brockman talked to her a good bit, and so there's stuff from her there. But we don't know her, right? And so I hate to, I hate to. It's not judge is not the word, but I hate to speak for her, but it's certainly possible that it wasn't just Ray who was in denial, that his family might have also been rationalizing things. And I want to point to two things that we've discussed. One we discussed earlier, and one I'm going to talk about in a second. So we talked about how in that Agora newsletter, the newsletter put out by Bill Bonner, the founder of Agora, Bill Bonner's diary, and that thing he says, that sentence he says, and just remember, as we've discussed, Agora's not talking. Right, so we don't know what they know, and so we sort of have to read into it. He says, in one sad instance, an ex-employee committed suicide distraught over a personal problem. So what does Bonner know that we don't know? And what does he know that maybe the family doesn't want to talk about? Is he just making this up? Is he guessing? Or does he know there was some sort of personal problem? And what makes me think that he might? Porter Stansberry, we talked about him a lot. He did not appear in the Unsolved Mysteries episode, but he did talk to the director of that episode and sort of explained that he didn't want to be involved, and at the time the reason they put the gag order on the Agora, this is what he says, the Agora employees, is they didn't want to make it a bigger story than it already was, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that was interesting from a story I read on digitalspy.com that was talking about the fact that Porter did not appear was Allison. There was something Porter did when Ray disappeared that upset Allison. So I'm going to read you the Digital Spy, just this part of the Digital Spy article, and we'll link to it on the website. One of the things that was very troubling to Allison that she told me about was that Porter did speak to the media very early on, she added. But what he said was Ray and Allison had been in therapy, which was not true, and that Ray had some psychological issues, which was not true. So I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting that Stansberry was saying that Ray had psychological issues at the time he disappeared. And you just wonder if maybe the best friend might have known a little bit more about what was going on with Ray than either Allison knew or that Allison was willing to recognize.
Yeah, wow. Because it's hard to believe that he would just pull that out of nowhere, you know?
Right. Now, he also says they were in therapy, which apparently wasn't true, but it's possible that
Maybe Ray said that, right?
exactly. I mean, we don't know what Ray was saying, and Ray was obviously in a weird place, and we don't even know what Ray would describe as therapy, right? I mean, just think back to that letter. What Ray may have told Stansberry may not have reflected reality, but I do think it is interesting that Porter made that comment. Now, I do want to offer one competing theory about this to go back to what we said about the timeline. And this could have been influenced by mental illness. I don't know, but if you recall, this all started because Ray got a telephone call from somebody at Agora, and I believe that if we knew who called him and what they said, we would know the answer to this almost in its entirety. Because here's what I think happened. If you go back to the timeline, this meeting of the Oxford Club, it was on March 14th. Now recall, Ray goes missing on May 16th. So March 14th, he films this meeting. The whole point of this meeting is to give people advice on investments. That kind of advice, that kind of information is so perishable. You need it right now. I mean, 2 months in investment time is a lifetime. And you may recall, we know that on the day he died, or the day before he died, that actually I think the day he died, the May 16th, that he had received a call from somebody in the advertising department of Agora wanting to know when this video would be done. Right now, we just know vaguely that that's what they said. We don't know the actual content of the conversation. And if you remember, we just talked about this on May 14th, just 2 days before, Ray had called Stansberry to leave that bizarre message. Another interesting thing that happened the day that Ray went missing, we talked about how he booked that time editing, but he also had called up a company that had rented him video editing equipment before, and he booked the editing suite there. And he talked to someone named Mark Gold, who knew Ray because he had been involved in some of his work that he'd done in the past and had rented stuff to him before. And he noted that Ray sounded like he was under a lot of pressure to get the project finished on time. Now, he didn't seem particularly unusual. It wasn't that Gold thought there was something wrong with him, but he was clearly under pressure. And we talked about that call that he received from the advertising department at Agora, and we talked about the call that led to his departing in the middle of the night. But it wasn't just one call that he received that day, and it wasn't just 2 calls. He actually received 5 different calls from Agora that day. And we don't know who any of those calls came from, other than the one from the advertising team. And it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder, what was the status of this video? Where was Ray at? Now, Steve King, unlike Stansberry, Steve King's actually talked a little bit about his interactions with Ray and his understanding of what was going on. And he has said that, yes, they needed that video and that he had been working on the video with the advertising team, and that he had been told they really needed this video and they needed it this week. So I just wonder what was the state of this project? Was it close to being finished like Steve King thought it was? Was the deadline that week, or was it earlier? I think if we knew who called Ray those 5 times that day, we might have a better understanding of what was going on and what led to this tragedy. So here's what I actually think happened. I think Ray filmed this stuff on March 14th, and he was supposed to have that back to Agora and to Stansbury much, much sooner than he actually got it back to him. Alice asked in the last episode, what exactly is he doing with this? Is he making a movie or whatever? And I don't know what sort of fancy stuff he was supposed to do with this, but I mean, he's not making The Matrix, right? And it has been 2 months by March 14th. So the day that he calls Stansbury, it's been 2 months since that meeting. And so what I imagine is that for whatever reason, whether it was mental illness or just he was a perfectionist or what, he didn't get that video done on time. And he's got $70,000 invested in this. So imagine, for instance, that on May 16th, that night, when he gets that call, the O call, that what they're telling him is, look, Ray, you don't even have the video done. We're not going to be able to pay you for this. It's just too late. Right? I mean, imagine advertising calls him in the morning and they want to know, where's the video? And he doesn't have it. And he's not going to have it. He's booked time for Saturday to do the editing. Who knows when it's going to be done? So imagine he has that call and he tells them that. And then the advertising department calls somebody else and says, Ray doesn't have it. We need to send it out. I mean, we should have sent it out a month ago, but we got to send it out today. I don't think we can pay him for this. Imagine all that happened and that he found that out that night. You're going to be $70,000 in the hole. And, oh, by the way, you're not getting paid for your work. That would have been a crushing blow for anybody, particularly if he's already sort of suffering sort of some of this mental anguish. So I imagine they called him and told him that. He drove out to Agora to try and beg them for more time. Maybe he didn't meet anybody. Maybe they weren't there. You know, it was late at night. They'd already gone home. They'd called him. And sort of in despair, he looks over and there's the Belvedere, which was very close to where he worked. And he climbs to the top and jumps off the building and kills himself. And I think if we knew who that call was from, we might know the answer to that. And I think that's why Agora reacted the way they did. Because as soon as they realized that Ray had killed himself, they pieced it together. They realized that the last person he talked to was somebody from them giving him really bad news, and they realized that's what triggered it. We could be in trouble here. We could be liable here. We've already got this SEC thing going. We can't have more bad news. We can't be responsible for this guy's death. And that's why they lawyered up, and that's why they didn't talk.
And that's a lot less of a malicious reason to not talk, right? But recognizing that it's going to be terrible publicity and you'll be blamed and like persecuted in the public eye for making a man jump off the building.
No, it makes perfect sense, right? Because Agora would know, you know, they didn't do it, number one, and they don't have any information, really, because the police already think it's suicide. So it's really just, are we going to expose ourselves to possible liability? You know, this, like I said, this is pure speculation.
And you know what? This makes a lot of sense why Porter would be so involved until he's found, because he may just really think that his friend is missing. Maybe he was kidnapped. Maybe something terrible happened to him. But when it became clear it was suicide, that's when the dots connected, and that's why he stopped talking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes all the sense in the world. I think it makes all the sense in the world. And, you know, the one thing I'll say about it is if that is true, and who knows if it's true. I mean, like I said, this is speculation, and unless we knew who he talked to, I don't think we could ever know the answer to that. But it would be nice if after all these years, Porter or somebody could just let Allison know that. You know, I don't really know anything about the civil death laws in Maryland or whatever, or what kind of liability they might be under, but you've got this family and you've got this woman who's wondered all these years what happened and why it happened. And if they do have that information, you know, at some point I hope they'll share it with her.
And just to be clear, I think if it's based on your theory, and that is the extent of Agora's involvement, I don't think there's a case against them. You can't be held responsible for someone else's mental break. And if he breaks a contract and they're just informing him that he's broken a contract and they can't, you know, pay him because he's broken the contract, I think there's no civil liability there for his death.
And I would even bet, I mean, like I said, just based on this, I would bet they wanted that tape no later than 30 days after the end of that conference. I mean, just guessing, just sort of based on common sense and knowledge of how the financial world
I
works.
bet they were I bet they were like giving him so much leeway because like he's taking out money on it, he's Porter's friend, and finally it got to a point where it's like, man, this is a meaningless video. We're 2 months out. This is completely old information. It's worthless.
Right. No, I think it makes a lot of sense. I don't think Agora is responsible for all the reasons you said, but I could totally imagine him feeling like even putting aside mental illness. I mean, with mental illness certainly, but even putting that aside, just feeling like how much he had failed Allison, and he'd put $70,000 on her credit card, and she was so excited about moving back to LA, and how are they going to do that now? And what is this going to mean for his business? What kind of reputation is he going to have or whatever? And is Stansberry ever going to work with him again? Yeah, I mean, it would have been a huge blow. So one other thing I want to talk about before we wrap up, when we're sort of trying to look at holes in our theories. Let's say that it wasn't a psychological break. Let's say it was just suicide, and that it was over the $70,000, or over any number of things. But the $70,000 seems like a reason you might commit suicide. You might think to yourself, and Makita Brotman even says this in her book, that seems like an extreme thing to kill yourself over. I mean, $70,000 of credit card
It's
debt.
not like, I mean, 70,000 isn't nothing, but it's also not like $1 million, something you could never pay back in your whole life.
Exactly. And I think it is an extreme thing to do, but I'll just point out it would not be the first time that Rey did something extreme in the heat of the moment. And I go all the way back to the 1996 Olympics. We talked about this. We talked about how hard Rey worked at water polo and how good he was. I mean, he was somebody that people thought, this guy he can be an Olympian. In fact, Rey, he ended up getting a scholarship, a full water polo scholarship at the University of the Pacific in Stockton, California. And his name, according to Makita Brotman's book, is still on the Pacific Tigers Water Polo Hall of Fame. And that talent was recognized. And as a matter of fact, in 1996, when the Olympics were going to be in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States, Rey was called up by the U.S. water polo team to come play for them. And I'll read you what Makita Brotman says about this. At 23, Rey was playing professionally in Spain at the time. At 23, he returned immediately to LA to begin training. Unfortunately, he was still young enough that his temper got the better of him. The way P, and that's one of his teammates, described it, Rey had a falling out with the coach around 2 weeks before the men were due to leave for Atlanta and was cut from the team. Those who knew him say it was the biggest regret of his life.
Man, to do something, I mean, I don't know what the dispute is, but to do something like that when you're that close to going to the Olympics, basically any athlete's, crowning jewel for your sports career, if that's not rash, I'm not sure what is.
Right. And like you said, we don't know what the dispute was, but I think everybody can agree that, and I think Rey would have told you that he did let the moment get the best of him, right? And he did something that it probably didn't take him very long
Couldn't
at all.
take back.
Exactly, to realize I can't take this back, and what a huge mistake that was. And while that's a long line to draw between 1996 and 2006, and what happened on the water polo team and what happened on the top of that building, but that's something that tells me that maybe the fact that the family thinks he wouldn't do this isn't necessarily definitive. I think it is. I'm sure if you had asked them, would he do something to get thrown off the water polo team, the Olympic team, 2 weeks before the Olympics, they probably would have told you no at the time.
And that's a really fair point, Brett, because like the picture that is painted by the Unsolved Mysteries episode, and also by Allison and by his brother and mom, is this just happy-go-lucky, everything is always great kind of guy, just does not jive with this story about him having a dispute that gets him thrown off the water polo team right before the Olympics. You know, that's a pretty drastic thing.
It's a very drastic thing. And I think two things can be true at the same time. And that's his friends and family are going to paint him in the best possible light. Completely understand that. That is completely understandable and the normal thing to do. And this doesn't make Rey a bad person, but his family can present him that way, and he might have been that way most of the time, and yet he's still human. He's not perfect. And like all of us, he had internal struggles and demons and whatever. And I think a lot of times in these cases, there is a tendency, and we see this, we saw it in Marbury, right? I mean, Marbury, her family, for instance, I'll give you an example. In that case, right after Marbury disappeared, Fred Murray talked about how she wrecked the car that Saturday night, his car, and of course he got mad at her, but then he thought, man, if this is the only trouble that kid ever gets into, I'm a lucky man. And that's a very nice thing to say, but that wasn't the only trouble Mara had gotten into. I mean, she hadn't been kicked out of West Point, but she had the incident of stealing from Fort Knox. She had the credit card fraud only a few months before in Massachusetts. The people we love, we paint them in the perfect light, the best light. And that's understandable. But when you're trying to figure out what happened in a moment like this, sometimes you have to look at people like people and not necessarily the way you want to remember them, which is obviously in their very best light.
Well put, Brett.
And there's one other thing I want to mention, one other tiny clue in this case that seems to have so many of them. Allison had given Rey a penny with a heart stamped out of the middle of it. So you can imagine sort of a penny with a hole in the middle shaped like a heart. And she had told him that if he ever needed to feel like she was close by, that he could take that penny and it would symbolize, their love for each other and the fact that she was always with him. That penny Rey kept in a little bowl on the dresser in their bedroom, and Allison had always seen it there. But on the day Rey went missing, the penny was gone. And it was later found in Rey's pocket. And you just got to wonder, did he know he was going to need her that night? Did he know he was going to need her strength? That he wanted to be with her one last time? It's impossible to say for sure. But I think when you add that, along with all the other things we've talked about, it becomes pretty clear that whether Rey was suffering from some sort of mental illness or whether the pressures of life led him to take that running leap off the Belvedere, he did it himself.
I feel like we didn't pick these on purpose, but it seems like mental illness has such a strain through a lot of our cases. And, it's not surprising, especially when these are mysterious cases, because we talked about this in our very first episode, but when there's mental illness infused, typically people don't act in ways that others find rational or follow a pattern. And that's partly why it makes these cases so mysterious.
Right. And so difficult to ever solve. But at the end of the day, I don't know exactly what happened on that roof, and I'm not sure exactly what drove him to do it, but I do think that Rey ran off that roof. Whether he was trying to kill himself or not, it was him. There was no murder. There was no conspiracy. There was no helicopter. He did decide, either consciously or unconsciously, to kill himself that day. So that's what I think happened. I think that's what the evidence suggests.
The reason it's become a mystery is that his loved ones, those who knew him best, say it's impossible. He would never do this. Just like in What's Wrong with Aunt Diane. The family was adamant. There's no way she could have done something like that. And in that case, we just had more evidence. We had the toxicology report that showed that she was highly intoxicated on marijuana and alcohol. Here, we just don't have that kind of confirmatory evidence that shows like it was, in fact, he did do it. And maybe that's why this is more of a mystery than the Aunt Diane. But I couldn't help but hear the same reverberations from those who loved him. There's no way he could have done that.
Yeah, and they're the real victims here. I mean, they're the people who were left behind, and they've had to deal with this for a long time. I wish they would get some sort of truth and some sort of closure. But like I said, I think the folks at Agora and Porter Stansberry, I really do think they hold that in their hands, and I hope, if nothing else, I mean, look, maybe I'm wrong, and that call had nothing to do with anything. Even more reason to just go ahead and take care of that mystery, and take that burden off that family, so they know at least a little bit more about what happened to their husband, friend, brother, and son. So that was a heavy episode. It's a heavy case. It's a great mystery. I know a lot of you guys are going to disagree with us. If we made any mistakes, let us know. You guys know how to reach us at ProsecutorsPod for Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. ProsecutorsPodcast.com, ProsecutorsPod@gmail.com. Keep putting up those 5-star reviews. Love to see them. Thanks for everybody who's been supporting us. You guys have been great. It's been a pleasure, Alice.
As always.
And I look forward to doing it again with you soon. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. And you thought it was over, didn't you? So did we. We recorded this episode right after we recorded episodes 1 and 2. We published those 2 episodes. We uploaded this one to the internet to have it ready to go. And then we got an email from Stansberry and Associates.
What? That's exactly what we thought when we saw the email.
When I sent Alice the text saying that we had just got an email from Stansberry's representatives, she immediately was like, "Are we being sued?" Which was a good question.
So, because we've been sued, we're shutting it all down. Thanks for your support. Bye, everybody.
Right. Yeah. See you guys later. No, this is really interesting, and it's something we wanted to share with you, and it actually provides a lot of information that we did not have before. Interestingly, it's not a lot of information that changes our view, but number one, we wanted to share with you the fact that we had been contacted by representatives of Stansberry Research, which is what it's called now. And we wanted to go ahead and share with you some of this information. As we often say, we are always open to new information. We're always willing to integrate it into our podcast, and normally in a follow-up, but hey, we're just not even going to make you guys wait this time.
I mean, part of the reason that we're not re-recording but adding on to this episode, even though we thought we were finished with the episode, is because we received so many messages from you all after the first 2 episodes. Thank you for those messages, and you were so excited for the 3rd episode. We just did not think it was fair to make you wait another week for additional information. We wanted you to have all of the information so that you can further formulate your own theories and also test our theories.
So I'm going to read you this email. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I'm going to read you the important parts. The subject line is information regarding the Rey Rivera episode aired by Unsolved Mysteries. The email is to us from David Cherbook. And it says, "Dear Brett and Alice, I represent Stansberry Research, the Baltimore newsletter publisher, whose founder, Porter Stansberry, was the focus of Netflix's recent episode of Unsolved Mysteries about the disappearance and death of Rey Rivera in 2006. I write to inform you that Netflix and the producers of the show, Cosgrove Murer, have been notified by Stansberry's attorneys that there are serious errors and omissions in their version of the Rivera story, which must be retracted and corrected as soon as possible. We are notifying other podcasters who are planning to cover the case, that unless they perform original research of their own and fully report on the contents of the FBI and medical examiner's reports, that the following disclaimer is requested to be published on the relevant episode description page and as an audio recording before the podcast. We are not going to read this disclaimer."
I mean, I just have to note there, though, by the time I got to the 2nd paragraph, I started feeling really good about our research because we didn't just rely on the Unsolved Mysteries episode, which we told you from the 1st episode of Rey Rivera that we thought was wholly lacking in giving the entire story.
And I think now that you've heard our 3 episodes, you can understand why Stansberry is upset, because it did leave a lot out. And look, I get it. You know, they're going for drama. They're trying to make this seem even more mysterious than it already is. But it certainly painted Stansberry in a bad light. You know, we criticized Stansberry for some things that we thought were true based on the Unsolved Mysteries episode, including I said he could have at least hired a private investigator. It turns out he did hire a private investigator. We tweeted about that last week. There was a newspaper article detailing that. But really, what this disclaimer says, and like I said, I'm not going to read it, is it goes through a lot of the things we have already gone through with you. It goes through that FBI report. It talks about possible mental illness that affected Ray. But I will say this. There are several pieces of information that are attached to this email that, as far as I know, have not been available to the public. I emailed this person back to get explicit permission to publish those. They did not respond, and so I'm taking it upon myself to publish them. So we will be putting these on our website, and they include things. If you've read Makita Brotman's book, you know she talks about how she did a FOIA request for the FBI analysis, and she only got a few pages, and she tried really hard to get the police report and kept running into a brick wall, and she wanted the full autopsy report and couldn't get it. Well, we got it all because they sent it to us. Apparently, Stansberry and Associates, or Stansberry Research in this case, didn't have any trouble getting the FBI report, the police report, the autopsy report. Now, they are redacted in part, but there's a lot of information there that you probably haven't seen. And so we're going to put those on the website so that you can look at them.
And one quick note about this redacted FBI report. Those of you who have been with us for a while and listened to our FOIA episode, you're going to love that you understand what all these redactions mean next to them. So you're welcome, FOIA episode.
And when you look at it, you can tell exactly why most of it is redacted. It's personally identifying information. It's the name of agents who worked on this case. You know, the name of Rivera's employer, et cetera, et cetera. It is interesting because we'll talk about this in a second. We'll talk about some of the inconsistencies in this email with what we know to be true. But look, there is one piece of information in this email and in these reports that is shocking. And so I just want to go ahead and talk about that right now. And it's shocking because if it's true, the fact that it's been kept from us for so long really does make you question a lot of things. It makes you question the Unsolved Mysteries episode. It frankly makes you question, the entirety of the Unsolved Mysteries. If they knew this information and they did not share it with the public, it's very surprising. But let me start with something that's in the police report that you are going to find interesting. You may recall we talked about how it's not easy to get to the roof of the Belvedere Hotel. Makita Brotman talks about that in her book, and we said something like, hey, it's a condo, but it's not a condo Ray lives in, and he would not necessarily be familiar with a Belvedere. Well, according to the police report, he was more familiar with it than we ever could have imagined. In the police report, part of it says, it was also determined that the roof was accessible and the victim had frequented the hotel on several occasions in the past. Now, the police report doesn't go so far to say that Rivera had frequented the roof. And Alice said earlier that this reminds us a lot of Elisa Lam, and boy, does it ever. But although the police report doesn't say that, apparently, the police officers who investigated this case were aware that Ray was not only familiar with the hotel, and the roof was not only accessible, but in fact, he had been on that roof before. And so I'm going to read you from the information that was sent to us by Stansberry Research. Now, I do want to say one thing. The police report says he is familiar with the hotel. It does not include this information. I have not heard firsthand from the people who were cited in this document. I will be very interested to know whether they confirm it.
Before Brett tells you this new information, just so you know what the police report says, it says the victim had frequented the hotel. Doesn't say anything about the roof in terms of the victim being there. But this is what additional information we do have.
So here is what this document says that was prepared by Stansberry researchers representatives. Ray and Allison Rivera went to the Belvedere at least twice before his death. Commissioner Fred Billsfeld and Detective Marvin Snyder, the lead detective, on the Rivera case recently confirmed that Allison admitted to police that she and Ray had previously been to the roof of the Belvedere Hotel together to watch a sunset. I just want to stop there before I read the next sentence, which is also shocking. If that's true...
Oh my gosh, Brett. I mean, here is what's shocking. If Unsolved Mysteries knew this and they didn't put this out there, I think it's very misleading. But here's what's even more shocking. The entire Unsolved Mysteries episode is really a long interview with Allison. And Allison, I don't know if she had told this to the series and they cut it out. But it's a huge piece of the puzzle. Huge piece.
And this goes, we've talked a lot about Brian Schaefer. You remember Brian Schaefer disappeared? And I have said again and again and again that what I think is going on in that case is there is some piece of information that we don't know that would solve the puzzle, right? Well, that's what this is. I mean, this is such a huge piece of information because it takes so much of the mystery out of this. It shows you that Ray had been to the Belvedere, he had been to the roof, he would have known how to get to the roof. And I'm just going to read you the next line in this, because once again, if this is true, then all of this starts to shake out. And just add this to everything we've already talked about in this episode. When Ray left his house for the last time, he left the computer running with a website showing what time the sun would set in Baltimore that day. Just letting that sink in.
Let's go back. We're both talking over each other because we're so excited about this new information. I have to again say that the only way we have this information is from Stansbury. So we haven't independently corroborated it. So take it with a grain of salt. But they are putting this out there, and this is big information to put out there if there's no basis for it. Going up to the roof with your newlywed wife to watch the sunset is a very, very romantic thing to do, right, Brett? I mean, I don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
When I was younger, I mean, I still do this, with my husband. We watch the sunset, and it's beautiful and romantic. What we do know is if he is trying to kill himself and he's looking up the sunset, he probably wants his last memory to be something romantic and beautiful and happy, right? And I assume watching the sunset on the roof with Allison is one of the happiest moments he can remember.
And remember, what was the last thing we talked about, 20 minutes ago in this episode? What did Ray take with him that he never took with him? The penny that Allison had given him with a heart stamped out of the middle that she told him, when this is with you, I am with you. It just all falls into place. If this is true, and like Alice said, if it's not true, then Stansbury, they got big problems, because if people can disprove this and debunk it, then it really, really undermines Stansbury and any credibility he has. But if this is true, that they spent time on the roof, that they went and saw the sunset, that he looked up the sunset time, that he took that penny with him that night, then I don't think there's any question what happened here. Whether it was suicide for all the reasons we talked about, money or some sort of psychological issue or whatever, it takes away all those questions about the how and the why would he do this. For me, at least, if this information is true, then I think this mystery is solved.
I'm right there with you. And like we said, we reached our conclusions when we recorded episode 3 well before we received this information. But I think all of this new information just supports the conclusion we reached.
Now, I do want to say, there are reasons within the document that we were sent to doubt this information, because there are things in this, what they call a fact sheet, that are questionable.
Right.
And so I just want to read you a couple of things that they sent to us that I think are questionable.
I'm looking at the biggest one for me right now.
So this is a crisis communications firm. Their job is to help protect Porter Stansbury's reputation. And so what they've done is they've taken the evidence and they've put it together as well as they can to try and pitch it to the world, to people like us, and to way more important people than us, to get them to tell the story that they want told.
How about the Allison being angry? Because that's not a fact.
Oh yeah. Okay. So this is so good. Why don't you go ahead and do that one, Alice?
Okay, so for example, this is called a fact sheet, but it's really more of like an argumentative brief, like we would write an advocacy brief, right? Because one of the bullet points, kind of buried in other facts, they claim that because Allison was left with the $90,000 of debt, she was angry that Ray's longtime friend Porter did not compensate her after Ray's death. That's incredibly argumentative. I mean, it's based on Makita Brotman's book. Brotman can make that argument because she's researching and she's drawing her own conclusions. But for that to be part of the official fact sheet is very questionable. Allison probably was angry.
And she should be angry. And we talked about this, right? Like, this was a shitty thing to do. You should have paid the $90,000.
But to allege that because she's angry about this, she would somehow create a misleading story and mislead either the Unsolved Mysteries producers or to make an episode to attack Porter. I don't think the Unsolved Mysteries was Allison's attempt to attack Porter. I think it was her true belief that there's no way Ray could have killed himself.
And I mean, look, if Allison left out the part about the sunset, I think the reason she left it out was not duplicitous. It wasn't she was trying to create a false story to punish Porter Stansberry. She probably left it out because she knows it's going to make people think Ray killed himself, and she doesn't think he killed himself, and she doesn't want to add anything to that narrative, right? And that's a very different thing from her purposely trying to destroy Porter Stansberry because he didn't pay off the $90,000. And this fact sheet definitely makes you wants to make you think that Allison had an axe to grind and you can't believe anything she said.
Right. I think what's motivating her, like all along, is just that she does not believe, her beloved committed suicide.
Right. Exactly. So the next point on this little fact sheet is completely misleading. So I'll just go ahead and read it to you. The phone call Rey Rivera received before leaving his house for the last time was not from Stansberry and Associates. Now look, let me just go ahead and say, I'll go ahead and read the rest of it. Contrary to Allison Rivera's claim on Unsolved Mystery, the last call that Ray received just before he left his home was from the Fells Point neighborhood of Baltimore, not from a switchboard at Stansberry and Associates. In addition, Ray did not work at Stansberry and Associates when he disappeared, despite Unsolved Mystery's representation to the contrary. He voluntarily resigned from Stansberry and Associates more than 6 months before his death and was working as an independent contractor. Let me just go through all the things that are wrong here, right? I mean, number one, maybe they're right that this was a random call from the, quote, Fells Point neighborhood of Baltimore that was completely unrelated to Stansberry and Associates. Well, Makita Brotman, in her book, which they cite repeatedly in this document, and they want to present her as an expert, she says that he did get a call from a switchboard. It wasn't Stansberry and Associates. It was Agora's switchboard, which you may recall Stansberry and Associates is part of. It's under their umbrella. So assuming that Makita Brotman is right about that, then you can see how this is misleading. Stansberry is trying to say, oh, it wasn't Stansberry and Associates switchboard. Well, I have no idea what they're talking about, right? No, it was your parent company's switchboard.
Remember in episode 2 where I talked about how you can be sneaky as a witness by just answering the question directly before you? In a way, they're doing this, right? They're doing more specific, but by being so specific, they're actually misleading you because Agora obviously is the umbrella company.
And the last sentence, he voluntarily resigned from Stansberry and Associates more than 6 months before his death and was working as an independent contractor. Who was he working as an independent contractor for?
Stansberry.
Stansberry. You can't do that, right? Like this is a very misleading bullet point. And if I've worked in communications before, if I was working for this crisis communications firm, I might say this is a bridge too far. We shouldn't do that. And then there's the gag order paragraph, because they have a gag order paragraph as well.
I will say, when we got to the gag order part, and it is page 3 of a 4-page document. So if this were in fact true, that there was no gag order or there was no direction from the company not to talk to police, I would have put it at number 1, right? Because that sounds really bad to have your company issue a gag order. Now, they say Bullet point, there was no gag order of any kind. And they claim there was no gag order of any kind, and Stansberry and Associates never instructed employees or any other person not to speak or cooperate with the police. In fact, documents prove the exact opposite is true. And they cite to 2 emails, and they do attach these emails to their email to us, and I will say this is very misleading.
Yeah, when were those emails sent?
Those emails were sent when Rey was missing, before his body was found. And we had said all along that while Porter had come back from out of town to help search, and his coworkers were the ones who ultimately discovered the hole in the roof and alerted police to the hole. And then ultimately, obviously, we know now that Rey was found inside that building. After that was when we had said that the gag order, whatever you want to call it, instruction not to talk to police, instruction not to talk to the public, was issued for Stansberry and Associates. So these emails don't actually support that argument. So that's, again, a bridge too far, I think.
And let me read to you from a couple other documents that undermine the point they're trying to make there. The first is from Makita Brockman's book. Once again, they point to Makita Brockman throughout this email as an expert on this. And she writes in her book, after Rey's death, employees at Agora were instructed not to speak about the matter to the police. They were protected by the company's lawyers. Allison never learned who placed that final call. That's from Makita Brockman's book. From the FBI report that we were just sent by Stansberry and their people, it says on page 2, Rivera's wife gave police consent to search their home, and his computer was collected as evidence. The computer has not been analyzed by forensic examiners to date. Rivera's employer, blank, it's redacted, but we all know who, hired a private detective, that's good, because of security concerns, and sent other employees home after Rey's disappearance. Then, like a bunch of blanks, refused to answer questions about Rivera during his interview. I guess you can probably guess who that is. BPD confirmed that Rivera was not a subject of the SEC's investigation. That's a different thing. Rivera and blank had been close friends in the past. Prior to Rey's death, blank offered a $1,000 reward for information leading to Rivera's whereabouts during his disappearance.
So we obviously know who those blanks are. It's Porter.
We know who those blanks are. And it seems pretty clear that the employer, at least as far as the FBI knew, was sending its people home and telling them not to speak about this.
And this is where you can't have your cake and eat it too. I just did a quick Control F to see how many times they cited Makita Brockman in for 3.5 pages, really. 3 pages and a little bit. And they cite her 8 times. And Makita's own research contradicts what they claim to be facts here. So.
And what's crazy, under this bullet point of there was no gag order of any kind, they cite to Makita Brockman, as stated in the Brockman book. At least 3 of Rey's former colleagues gave statements to the police after they saw the hole in the roof that led to the discovery of Rey Rivera's body.
So we're being hard on this document because, well, first of all, you can't send this document to us and make an argument and just think that we'll take it whole cloth, because again, we have to evaluate all the evidence before us. So we've read you the evidence that we think is compelling. We don't have any contradicting evidence, the going to the roof for the sunset and having been up to the roof before. So I have no reason to doubt that information at this point. But then if you stuff all this other information in argumentative paragraphs within the document, I'm going to have to point it out.
And I mean, just to continue going back to the phone call thing, I have Makita Brockman's book open, and this is where she talks about this, so I might as well read this to you too. The phone call on Tuesday, May 16, that caused Rivera to leave home in a hurry was from somebody at Agora, the umbrella organization of which the Oxford Club was a subsidiary. At the time, Agora used a business line that diverted all its connections to a single number, so it is impossible to know who placed the call. No one at Agora admits to calling or meeting with Rivera that day, although the company's phone records for that day show 5 calls to Rivera's number. This is what we talked about earlier in the episode. So, I mean, look, I don't think Porter Stansberry had anything to do with Rey's death. We've been pretty clear about that. I don't think Agora had anything to do with it, except maybe, as we said, if the contract fell through, that could have been a catalyst for it. But it doesn't help you to try and hide between some sort of corporate veil and say, well, we're our own thing, so don't look at the man behind the curtain. Don't look at the agora behind the curtain. And if we're wrong about this, and Stansberry and Associates had become completely independent from Agora by that time, and literally they did have nothing to do with this, I'm sure we'll get another email, and we'll be happy to follow up. We don't want to mislead people. We don't want to slander Porter Stansberry, and we certainly don't want to do what is pretty clear that the Unsolved Mysteries episode did, and that's leave out a bunch of important information. I'll just go ahead and read the next 2 bullet points because I think this is information that Stansberry deserves to have out there, and I have no reason to think it's not true. The first one is Porter Stansberry cooperated fully with the police investigating his friend's case. In an effort to help with the investigation of his friend's disappearance, Porter Stansberry employed extensive resources, got the mayor's office involved in trying to push the police to take the investigation more seriously, offered a $5,000 reward, and orchestrated neighborhood searches. And all that seems to be confirmed in Makita Brotman's book. We talked about that in our episodes. After Ray's body was found, Porter met with lead detective Marvin Snyder on June 23, 2006, answered all of his questions with a witness present, and never heard from the police again. And I think that's also accurate. I don't think the police think he had anything to do with it. And the last thing, Porter Stansberry was out of town at the time of Ray's disappearance. He was out of town at a conference with a whole bunch of Stansberry and Associates folks, and there are tons of witnesses. I mean, Porter Stansberry, whatever happened, Porter Stansberry didn't throw Rey Rivera off that roof. So yeah, I mean, like I said, this is a really interesting letter. It contains a lot of information. A lot of it is backed up by the documents that were sent to us. We're going to put those on the website. But even in this document, there are things that are misleading.
And here's the thing. If in fact Stansberry's representatives are listening, I recommend you take out those overreaching paragraphs and you have a much stronger document.
Yeah, I mean, look, the first few parts of this that talk about the autopsy report and the findings of the police, the FBI, Makita Brotman, it is absolutely true. And as we said, every piece of evidence in this case points to suicide, right? I mean, you can argue about the autopsy, and they say the autopsy is 100% consistent with suicide. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this. You can look at the autopsy report yourself because we're going to put it online.
Hey Brett, I'm going to make a commentary on what I think happened in this fact sheet. I will say the first 2 pages of this fact sheet are very factual and they make sense and they're supported by the documents. It's about what the documents say about the autopsy, what the FBI report says about some sort of mental illness being at play here. I think what happened, and we see this in the law a lot, the next page and a half was sent to probably the client, and the client said, this doesn't push back against the narrative enough. It doesn't make us look good. Instead of just disproving what Unsolved Mysteries is implicating, we want an affirmative argument out there about why. That's why the argument about Allison is being mad about the $90,000 of debt, and how Porter has nothing to do with this. He was out of town. He cooperated. There was no gag order. The way those read, I feel like the client pushed back and said, we want these more aggressive points in there. And that's why this fact sheet actually reads as 2 fact sheets to me.
I think that is a brilliant point.
Oh, thank you. I say that from experience because we see this very often. We'll get a very well-written brief from counsel, and it will be interspersed with craziness, things that are not supported by the facts or the law. And all I can think of is that they have a very volatile client who's paying the bills, and they insist on a particular sentence that must be inserted into the brief, and it really hurts the overall argument. And this is why, as lawyers, we typically tell our clients, let us do our jobs. And in this case, the communication firm probably should have pushed back and said, let us do our jobs. We do this, we do crisis management, let us crisis manage, as opposed to insert more crisis into the situation. And I think that's why we're reading a document that seems incongruous and honestly reads like 2 completely different fact sheets. So it's been a couple weeks since I watched the Rey Rivera episode on Unsolved Mysteries, so I may be getting this wrong, and I'm sure someone will tell me if I'm wrong. But I do agree with Stansberry that it seems that the Unsolved Mysteries episode was a bit misleading with respect to the autopsy report. What I remember Unsolved Mysteries episode did was they put up a picture of the autopsy report, and it's on the last page, which you can see on our, I'm sorry, the second to last page, which is going to be on our website, and it is the opinion of the medical examiner, chief medical examiner, David R. Fowler, MD. And I believe what the episode did was it highlighted portions of this opinion and made the argument without actually highlighting the words in the opinion to say that because there was the right tibia and fibula, bones of the lower leg, were broken, and then there's nothing to support this within the autopsy report. I believe Unsolved Mysteries spoke over in a voiceover and did not highlight anything within this opinion and said something to the effect of that injury was not consistent with a fall. And then they went straight to the opinion and highlighted undetermined. So that is not what this opinion says. I will read you the full sentence. It says, because the certain circumstances surrounding the incident are unclear, and it is not known how the deceased came to have precipitated from such a height, the manner of death is best classified as undetermined. So in other words, this autopsy report is saying the medical examiner reaches the opinion that the cause of death is undetermined, not because of a specific injury that may have been inconsistent with a fall from a roof, but rather because his body had been decomposing and it was not clear how someone could fall from such a height. The medical examiner concludes that the cause of death is undetermined.
Yeah.
So I'll give them that.
I just want to go back to what Alice said, looking at these notes again. If they had stopped after the second page, if they had just done the second page and then did those last two bullet points about Porter Stansberry and how he cooperated with the police, this would be a great fact sheet.
Their credibility.
It's the third page where they go off the rails and they reach too far and they really risk undermining their own position.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and it's even,
their credibility.
I mean, it's always hard to tell who wrote what part, but I would venture to say that it's written in a different tone as well, as in it may be written by a different author, such as, say, the client.
Right. No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I think they wrote this. It was a really good fact sheet. It was well grounded in the facts. They sent it over to the client, and the client added these things, and they're the client, so it got sent out. I think that's exactly what happened.
They pay the bills.
Yeah, they pay the bills.
But by the way, this is what we call client management. For lawyers, a good lawyer knows how to manage their client and keep their client from doing things like this. We see this all too often in court, especially during trial. We've had situations where the client fires the attorney on the spot during trial because they don't like the way the attorney is working. That is an extreme case of not having your client managed. A less extreme case is letting them insert things like these bullet points that we think are just inaccurate.
And look, I want you guys to all take a look at this stuff and let us know what you think. I do want to say, once again, a little bit in Stansberry's defense, because given everything we've said, if it's true that Ray went up there to kill himself and killed himself, you can understand why Stansberry would be upset, particularly because it seems like Stansberry had a better understanding of sort of Ray's deteriorating mental condition than maybe other people did in Ray's life. So I can understand a little bit while Stansberry's upset. I think Stansberry should remember that we do have it. I mean, Allison is a grieving widow, and she doesn't understand why Ray did what he did. And yeah, she's probably pretty pissed that she left her stuck with $90,000. Stansberry's not the victim here. I guess that's my main point. He may have been treated unfairly by the Unsolved Mysteries episode, but he's not the victim. But I do want to highlight, we received an email from an anonymous, I guess, tipster is one way to describe it, who forwarded us an email that Stansberry had sent on June 9th, 2006. So this is a month after Ray died. And I do want to read something here because I think it does humanize Stansberry, and it's a post-death statement Stansberry made, at least in this email, to whoever he was sending this to. And it says, P.S. As most of you know, I lost one of my best friends last month, Rey Rivera. We've been friends since our days together playing high school water polo in Winter Park, Florida. Although Ray was not my blood, he was a brother I chose. If you're blessed to have friends like that, you probably also know how tough it is to lose them. I appreciate the notes and emails I've received from all of you, and I hope you'll pardon me for not replying to all of them individually. Most of all, thank you for allowing me a week to grieve and then giving me a reason to get back to work.
Certainly backs up what we've been saying is that they were very, very close friends.
And look, I mean, this information is some bombshell stuff. That's why we wanted to share it with you. I think we now know. We don't know the cause, and I still think if we knew who made that phone call from Agora, we would know more about why Ray did what he did. But I think we know what happened now. That he had been up there with his wife. They had shared the sunset together. It was a place that was special to him. He looked up the time of the sunset. He got that penny. He took it with him, and the rest, I don't think I need to say anything else. I think that's what happened here.
And I still think, like we said before, there was mental illness involved. And again, like we said previously with Aunt Diane, that his family didn't know about it. And I don't blame them that they didn't know about it when he was alive. It sounds like it probably was, it was onset later in life, but they don't want to believe that. And with the documents that we have, the FBI report, I think it's pretty clear that there was something going on.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And we're going to, like I said, we're going to put this stuff up on the website so you guys can look at it. This is probably the longest episode we'll ever do because it was done over a couple different times.
In two parts.
So thank you guys for sticking with us to the end of this story. I think this is remarkable because, as I said, and as we said at the beginning of this episode, we were going to get to the bottom of this case, and I think we have. I think we've gotten to the bottom of this. If we hear anything else from Stansberry or anybody else, we'll let you know. If anybody has any more information they want to share with us, let us know. We have a follow-up episode coming up tomorrow that we recorded in between recording this episode and receiving this information, so it doesn't have any of this discussion in it, but hope you guys will check that out. Otherwise, for real this time, we'll be back next week. And until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
I just want you to, I want to set the scene for you right now. I'm sitting here eating a bag of chocolate chips.
Nice.
It's just been that kind of a day. Like, straight up a bag. I didn't even bake it into a cookie. I just too much effort. I'm just eating a bag of chocolate chips right now.
See, I'm back on the keto, so I'm not doing gonna lose my COVID. I would love to say it was the COVID-19, but it's more like the COVID-30.
You look great.
Oh, well, that's so nice of you